Mr. Chairman, Senators, Stephen McCraw, Director of Texas Department of Public Safety. As Senator Gutierrez noted, it's been 28 days since the senseless massacre of 19 innocent children and their 2 teachers at Robb Elementary School. Much has been done, but much more needs to be done before this investigation is completed and presented to the District Attorney, Christina Mitchell, for her review. However, we do know this. There's compelling evidence that the law enforcement response to the attack at Robb Elementary was an abject failure and antithetical to everything we've learned over the last 2 decades since the Columbine massacre. 3 minutes after the subject entered the West Building, there was a sufficient number of armed officers wearing body armor to isolate, distract, and neutralize the subject. The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children. The officers had weapons, the children had none. The officers had body armor, the children had none. The officers had training, the subject had none. 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds. That's how long the children waited and the teachers waited in rooms 111 to be rescued. And while they waited, the on-scene commander waited for a radio and rifles. Then he waited for shields. Then he waited for SWAT. Lastly, he waited for a key that was never needed. The post-Columbine doctrine is clear and compelling and unambiguous. Stop the killing, stop the dying. You can't do the former unless you can't do the latter unless you do the former. Certainly, some things were done well, and even very well. The teachers quickly implemented active shooter protocols prior to the subject gaining entry. In fact, one teacher was able to call 911 and report that before the subject entered the campus. Law enforcement officers were able to evacuate hundreds of children in a safe and orderly manner. The district attorney, Christina Mitchell, and her staff led tireless efforts to take care of the victims and their families in the aftermath. And Senator Gutierrez talked a little about victim identification and victim notification. That is always a priority after such a tragedy. Very difficult to do, and she did an outstanding job in trying to handle that situation, blending all the different resources from local, state, and federal agencies at the time. Importantly, what I'd like to know that at the time of this death, or first of all, I'll go a little before I go to the timeline. I just want to cover one more thing, if you don't mind, is that with your permission, to quickly review some of the pre-attack events is what I'd like to do. I just think it's important to note, plus this is not just a DPS investigation and Texas Ranger investigation. We've worked closely from the beginning with all federal agencies and all agencies on the scene. In particular, on the investigative side, the FBI has provided tremendous resources, hundreds of agents, covered leads throughout the country, throughout the world, and also enhanced the videos with technology capabilities that they have back in Quantico. Very important to do, to get to the facts, to see exactly what happened. Because one thing is witness statements, another thing is video and audio recordings, period. So we're grateful for them. We're also grateful for ATF in terms of the initial phases as it relates to the firearms and weapons that were involved and ammunition. And their efforts continue. In fact, we'll continue to use the FBI in this regard. There's more interviews to go. We got re-interviews to do. So again, we're not done at this point in time, and we won't be done until the district attorney is satisfied that the investigation is completed and we're satisfied that what we have is correct. I can tell you just a quick overview of the subject. At the time of his death, he was 18 years old, lived with his grandparents on Diaz Street, which was 0.29 miles from Robb Elementary School. In fact, he attended Robb Elementary School 1 year, and that was 4th grade, in the very classroom that he was killed. He communicated extensively on several different social media platforms, including gaming platforms with individuals. And what's disturbing about some of the communications is that over the time, of the timeline and you look at them, it's almost as if he's communicating with people that's, if not supportive of the school shooter community, if there's such a thing, but certainly empathetic and sympathetic, as if they support. Look, it's a good thing. You get notoriety. You get points for being a school shooter. And it's obviously disturbing. And as a result of that, there are several messages. If we go back and look and assess after the fact, what could we have done, law enforcement, to prevent this before even happening? And that was the call after Santa Fe. Well, what can we do? Yes, we responded well, but what we can do to prevent it? And that was the focus. And it still is a continued focus. But we have yet to identify even one report to the school or to law enforcement that discussed animal cruelty, that discussed many things are described, a morose, suicidal, fatalistic loner who had sympathies with and been called a school shooter. He certainly took on the persona of a school shooter in dress and demeanor and over the last year. And people noted this, but yet it didn't get reported. So there's clearly, we did have and leveraged also the FBI's behavioral analysis unit, which is very good. Experts that independently look at this and look at the shooter and ask the question, could we have intervened? If we'd have known, could we have done something? And the answer is almost overwhelmingly yes. So when you go back and look after the fact, there's always things that could have been done if we would have known. That's why it's so important that the public reports this. So important, even if it's suspicious. Give us a chance. And we certainly know that we arrested a 13 and 14-year-old in Uvalde for planning an attack on Uvalde High School back in 2018. And they were charged with attempted or conspiracy to commit capital murder. That's what right looks like because the public reported it and it was investigated. And that's what right looks like. We know that I mentioned a number of statements. Also, at least 8 months prior to the attack, he was moving towards on what they would call a pathway to violence. He'd asked a family member to purchase him a weapon. He refused. He was 17 years old at the time, after he dropped out of high school on October 28th. Other messaging, other conversation. He also began buying things, and several purchases for rifles, accessories, specifically magazines. He didn't have a rifle, but he purchased magazines. He purchased slings. He purchased high-end optics, and he had money. He had money in a joint bank account, and I can't discuss some of the specifics. It's issued through a grand jury subpoena. But he had money and a joint account with his grandmother, and used a debit card to make those online purchases, several online purchases, at least 6, prior up until the day of the attack, or actually to the day of his birthday, May 16th. On May 16th, he was eligible to purchase a weapon. He purchased 2 5.56 millimeter rifles, one a higher end version of it. He purchased as many as 1,740 rounds through an online retailer and was able to purchase it. Was delivered to that residence at a later time. He purchased another 375 rounds of ammunition within that same couple of day period. We know that on May 14th, he placed on the line, he messaged, make it very careful, messaged online on these social media platforms, various different ones, 10 more days. Someone responded, what are you gonna do, shoot up a school? No, you'll see. Those types of things are those words are out there, but yet not reported 10 days before. And of course, very disturbingly, many messages that occurred on the day of the attack on May 24th. And, to a number of different friends, some tell them delete your messages along those lines. You'll see what's going to happen. And he was in communication many times in messaging and earlier FaceTime with a 15-year-old juvenile, and it was in Germany at the time, and told her, and I quote, I'm going to shoot my grandma in the head. And he later, I just shot my grandma in the head, and I'm going to go shoot up an elementary school. That was at 11:21 when that happened, 11:21. And with your permission, Chairman, I'd like to go to the timeline. And these events are taken from audio, video, body camera, 911 tapes, And so it's not subject to interpretation, it's simply subject to transcription. And you have a copy of the timeline in front of you, and I'll begin on page 1. And I'll try to quickly go through them. 11:28, and I'm going to round off the times. I'm not going to say the seconds, but I'll do it in order. The suspect crashes his vehicle into a ditch. Okay, this is at the intersection of Goss and Gerardine, in front of the school and in front of a funeral home. The subject didn't have a driver's license. The subject couldn't drive. And when he did drive, he was described as having problems with taking a turn. So people wonder, why, crashing like he did when he also attempted to turn, almost left, but then crashes into a ditch, a concrete ditch right in front of the school. If he's really going to the school to do something, what's his destination? Well, his destination was Robb Elementary School. There's no question about it. He did crash. Once he crashed, 2 males from the funeral home went out to see how he was. And at that point, that was 11:29. We heard a teacher. This teacher was inside the school, by the way. The teacher, was observant enough inside the school. She calls 911 and reports a man with a gun. That was 11:29. 11:31, the suspect began shooting the suspect had shot at, the individuals that came from the funeral home. Now he left 3 rounds. He shot 3 times at him. Missed him. One of the individuals got up, and they continued on, and of course reported that later. 11:31, the suspect begins shooting at the school. And there's classrooms on the West Building. And if we have it, the diagram on my left here, you can see this right here. So you can see the Diaz Street location, and you can see the west entrance. And if your permission, if I can stand up, Chairman, to be able to point that out. Okay, this is Diaz Street. Diaz Street's up here, 0.29 miles around. This is Goss Street. This is Gerardine Street. This is the funeral home I talked about. This is where he crashed, right here. The crash location. He was trying to make the turn here and crashed. It was his grandmother's pickup truck that he crashed in. He climbed out on the passenger side and took with him 1 rifle. He took with him his backpack at that point. That's when he shot at, when I described the time he shot at those 2 individuals, ran back to the funeral home. Then he situates himself. He moves to a fence. The fence is approximately 4 feet, throws the bag over, jumps over the fence, and proceeds in this direction. And the red on your chart is the direction that the subject is moving. As he moves into this area, as he moves along this area, he gets into this area right here. He begins shooting, As he's been shooting into the classrooms is what he's doing. He's initially right here, and on the timeline, if I go back up to the timeline, and note that he's 3 Uvalde PD officers, higher up here. Okay, multiple shots in fact, he shot 27 times as he walked along here. He dropped the backpack here for no apparent reason. He was situated right here among cars. There was cars at the time. And as he walked, he shot into these classrooms. There's 2 classrooms. There's actually 4, but 2 he shot into. There's 4 windows, 2 windows on each. He was firing into those classrooms. He proceeded to the west building, or the west entrance of the building. What we're calling the west, we're calling this east, and this is the south entrance. He proceeded in there. He opened the door. It was open. It was unlocked. I know there were reports before about a teacher putting a rock in it. That's a practice around the school, practice in many schools. Yes, that did happen, but that same teacher also removed the rock. It was the same teacher that called 911 and reported a man with a gun outside the school and the crash. So he also called the alarm, and the school goes into a lockdown, active shooter. And they get the kids, and I won't go through the protocols, you know, but they did what they were supposed to do in that regard. And one of those things is to lock the interior doors to the classrooms where the kids are at, lower the lights, and put them in a particular area the furthest away from the windows, furthest away from the doors possible. As the teachers were trying to protect the kids throughout the entire campus, he entered the west building here. Now, I can tell you from the door aspect, we can discuss the door a little bit later. You may have questions on it, but it was open as he walked in. Good. Thanks. This is where he is. Red indicates the subject. As he walks in, it's about 20 feet when you walk into this corridor, this east-west hallway. Then he's in the north-south hallway. He turns left, then he approaches, and you can't tell from the video. The challenge with the school video is it's a fisheye video located at this location. A little different than the video that we had at Santa Fe. So the view is very distorted. You can't see all the way to here, and you certainly can't see very far over here on the first iteration. The second iteration, we got a little bit better when it was sent back to Quantico to be enhanced or enhanced the second time. You can see much of what's going on. It provided a much clearer way for us to document exactly what happened in that hallway over that 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds. The subject lines up here. What you can't see, it's inset in here. What you can't see is which classroom he's shooting into exactly. But he's shooting at either 111 or 112 initially. Overall, there was 24 rounds that were left recovered out here, 27 in the hallway. Now, some of those rounds could have been, when we're evacuating, first responders are evacuating, trying to save lives, could have drugged some of those rounds out there. But for right now, it appears when we finish with the trajectory analysis, we'll be able to tell you how many exactly were fired by the subject into that room and how many were fired out by the subject. But for right now, you know, it appeared we had 27 rounds recovered in the hallway. The only shooting was not in this direction, it was in this direction here. He walked up to the door, he opened the door and walked in. Okay, then we heard shooting. As the timeline suggests, and through audio enhancement, we can hear how many shots were fired. The initial barrage of firing occurred within 100 rounds, occurred within the next couple of minutes. So you can go up on the timeline here. Again, shooting into classrooms 111, 112. He enters to 11:33. So we're talking about 32 seconds after he enters, because he entered West Building at 11:33. So the crash is 11:28, enters the building at 11:33, or 11:33 exactly, and 11:33 in seconds, begins shooting at the classroom, and then he enters into what we believe is 111. I say believe, okay, at this time, 111, and he begins shooting. If you go over your timeline, look at it, you'll see more than 100 rounds were fired initially. Another 11 rounds were fired at 11:37, okay, and injuring 2 officers were approaching. That the rooms, the walls inside the interior are sheetrock and bullets go through. The 2 were grazed at that point, retreated. I can tell you at 11:36, as we mentioned before, you had 3 Uvalde PD officers enter the west door. 11:35, 11:36, 2, and 2 Uvalde PD officers. So we had 4 officers, 7 officers right now in the building at 11:36. So that's pretty quick time for considering all the different factors in that regard. There was never a school resource officer on the scene. A school resource officer did respond, and when he responded to the location. He heard a man with a gun. So he's off campus, he's in his vehicle, he responds rapidly. As he does, he sees what he thinks when he drives in, he sees what he thinks is the subject back here. It wasn't the subject, it was a teacher. He drives directly towards that subject, the teacher, and says, "I'm out with the subject." So it had already been reported on the radio, man with a gun, okay, at the school, after a crash. He thinks he's got the subject. He drives quickly. He drove, over 50 miles an hour into it, going towards the subject. And unfortunately, that wasn't the subject. The subject was right here. He passed the subject as he went So that's why some of the confusion early on. Now, the doctrine for active shooters is clear. I mentioned it before. And you know, it's two sets of it. Hey, you stop the killing, you stop the dying. The other part of that doctrine is you isolate, you distract, and you neutralize. Everyone's taught this. You require it in TCOL training. We practice it, we preached it. This is the doctrine, and it recognizes that you run to the sound of gunfire. You know, when you get to gunfire, you don't stop. Okay, when you get there, you run into gunfire, okay, and it's so important to do so. And I'll tell you what, and I've said it before, and I hope I underscore this. There's no doubt in my mind that those officers would have gone, any one of them would have sacrificed their life for those children. Any one of them. If they knew there was kids in that room that were, and teachers in that room, I have great confidence that officers, those police officers, those local officers, would have done what was right. 1140, well, we have Chief, 1140, we have Chief, well, first report, officers contained in the office. Contained is not a word for active shooter. Contained is a barricaded subject. Contained is a situation where you may have a hostage, you need a SWAT team. Okay, you have time. The C's, you know, first you contain, then you communicate with the subject, then you call for SWAT, then you create an immediate action plan. That's not what this was. This was never anything more than an active shooter situation. But at some point, he's contained in the office. Then we have Chief Ariano calls Uvalde PD. It has been reported he did not have a radio with him. He did not. That was actually true. That was correct report. And this is the conversation that he had, and you can read it yourself in your notes. But all this for purposes of this. Chief Ariano, hey, it's Ariano. Can you hear me? I'll have to tell you where we're at. It's an emergency right now. I'm inside the building. Where this man has an AR-15. He shot a whole bunch of times. We're inside the building. He's in one room. I need a lot of firepower, so I need this building surrounded with as many AR-15s as possible. Can you hear me? The dispatch responded. You can be heard talking in the background and asking what room number. Chief, is the teacher with him? Is she in the room as he's in? Can you hear him? Ma'am? Dispatcher, I'm right here. Chief, ma'am, is the teacher with him in his classroom? Dispatcher, she's in another classroom. She's in room 102. Another person possible shot across from her. It wasn't 102, it was 112. Is the accurate number. Chief Ariano, okay, we have him in the room. He's got an AR-15. He's shot a lot. He's in the room. He hasn't come out yet. We're surrounded, but I don't have a radio with me. Please let all units know he's going to be in a room. He's in room 111 or 112, and we're in here. I'm in the hallway. Sergeant, another sergeant are here. We need this place surrounded, and if you have SWAT, I need them to set up south side of the building, which is the nearest to the location to the funeral home. Dispatcher confirms SWAT location. Chief Ariano, yes. They need to be outside the building and prepared because we don't have enough firepower. Right now it's all pistols and he has an AR-15. You can get the SWAT team set up by the funeral home, okay? And we need, yes, I need more firepower in here because we have pistols and this guy's got a rifle. So I don't have a radio. If somebody can come in, the dispatcher, Chief Ariano, but I am going to drop it when he comes out of the door, all right? So I need you to bring a radio for me and give me my radio. For me, I need to get one rifle. Hold on, I'm trying to set him up, or set him. I'm going to set him up right now, okay? Do me a favor, call me when SWAT is set up. I'm going to have you a vibrate, though. Call me twice if you have to. It's okay, all right, thank you. Questions have been asked about who's in charge. And much to the chagrin to some that when people believe in what they hear, that when the FBI shows up, no, they're not in charge, okay? When other agencies show up, you're not in charge. It's the agent that has the original jurisdiction is in charge, but you have options. Just because you're in charge and you have the authority and you're the ranking official, senior official on site, You can actually delegate that down. In my case, the lower I delegate it, the better in terms of sound decision making. Or you can delegate it to another agency, or you can ask another agency to take the lead. This is common practice in ICS, in Incident Command. We practice that in Texas. We always practice it. We preach it. We're very careful, and you'll find when you talk to the experts in the alert training program, as self-deploying is a risk. Deciding who's in charge, deciding on your own to take action without it being properly coordinated is a risk. It's one of the challenges you have in these type of situations. But nevertheless, in terms of if you're going to issue commands, okay, if you're going to direct action, you're the ranking official from the agency that has jurisdiction, you're the on-scene commander. Gunfire happens again at 11:40. Let's assume that was a barricaded subject who was contained. Well, he fires again, and he's room 111 and 112. It's not reasonable to expect that there's children and teachers in that room still alive. 11:41, Uvalde PD officer. We believe that he's barricaded in one of the offices. They're still shooting. More misinformation. He's not barricaded in an office. Okay, he's in a classroom 111 and 112. Dispatch asks if the door is locked, to which a Uvalde PD officer replies, I'm not sure. We have a hooligan to break it, a hooligan tool, so you can just break the lock and move in at the door. At 11:41, 4 first responders in the room, the east hallway. We had 2 constables, a fire marshal, and UPD officer. So officers continue to flood into the particular area. So we had 11 to begin with. We've added another 4 officers to it. The DPS trooper was the first DPS officer to arrive.
Director McCraw, we've got to ask you this.
Yes.
Best you can, speak into the mic.
Oh, yes, sir. I apologize.
So the system can pick it up. If you could pick that mic up, that would be great.
All right. How about that, sir? Does that work?
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman. At 11:42, we had a DPS trooper and 2 PD officers enter from the east hallway. She was there less than 2 minutes, looked around because at that point in time there's multiple officers, and she left the building to find other duties as assigned. 11:44, another suspect fired around. 11:44 later, UPD officers have some officers there available to get everybody back. UCISD officer Ruben Reese, and one of our sergeants, Sergeant Maldonado, actually drove Officer Reese to the scene. He enters at that point in time. An unknown officer says, they need to get out of the hallway. Well, before I need to talk about Officer Ruiz. He notes that she's been shot. He's talking about his wife. He got a call from his wife. His wife was in room 112 and later died. Unknown officer says, they need to get out of the hallway, to which an officer responds, Chief is in there. Chief is in charge right now. Hold on. 11:51, 7 Border Patrol agents enter the west door. There had been a call earlier for BORTAC, and BORTAC was en route. These aren't BORTAC agents that first responded. At 11:52, there's a first ballistic shield that enters the west door. At 11:52 later, UPD officers, units just showing up, can you help with crowd control? So officers after 11:52 are being diverted to crowd control activities. 11:53, unknown officer informs a DPS special agent that they need right now is a perimeter. Someone comments on whether there are still kids inside, to which the DPS special agent responds, if there is, then they just need to go in. Someone comments about whether there are still kids, in which he responds, if there is, then just need to go in. He enters the west building and is directed on where the suspect is focused on. This is from a body camera, and you'll note that any information that I'm using right now, it came from, it's color-coded, so when it's blue, it's body camera. Obviously, from video surveillance, it's either, whether it's funeral home and indicated, and of course, the Uvalde PD recordings as well. And you have that in your booklet. After some time, the DPS officer said, is there kids in there? We need to go in right now. Then he said, what's that? Then whoever's in charge will determine that, because of what he recommended, if there's kids in there, we need to go get them. And then later on, the DPS, he left the scene to look for kids, found a young boy in the restroom in the West Building that was hiding, and then went outside to look at, search other classrooms. There's a PD channel recording. Again, it's critical that let the PD take the point. 11:58, after an unknown officer was asked where the shooter is, another unknown officer advises the school chief of police is in there with him. There's a 911 call at 12:03, and that's the call from Chloe, the first time Chloe calls. And of course, it's heart-wrenching to listen to her. She's in room 112, okay? She was actually the only child in room 12 that was uninjured. Okay, there was 8 children killed, 2 teachers killed in that room. And of course, she was uninjured. 9 children were injured in room 112. 12:03, the second ballistic shield enters the west door. 12:04, the third ballistic shield enters the west door, and yet there's no action. 12:09, a PD officer, go around and get the master keys to the room. Elements of the BORTAC arriving at the elementary school was at 12:09 or 12:10. And I think the first BORTAC members went into the building at 12:15. During that time, the Uvalde ISD Ariano requests master key. Uvalde ISD Chief Ariano gives instructions to officers to have a sniper on the east roof. Master key, there's more than one master key for the West Building. Anytime the locks were changed, there was another master key for that lock. So you may find a master key, but there's 2 master keys. You've got to get both master keys. So there was some frustration in the discussion about this master key doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because that master key is not for that door. At 12:16, the USD chief says, I just need a key. The chief says, tell them to expletive wait. No one comes in. 12:20, the 4th ballistic shield shows up. At 12:21, importantly, the suspect fires 4 rounds. So if this is a barricaded subject, why is he still firing? Oh, thank you. The chief says at 12:28, let me back up to 12:21. Can you get a breaching tool, like a trailer house, like for a trailer house? The chief, we've lost 2 kids. These walls are thin. If he starts shooting, we're going to lose more kids. I have to say, we have to put those to the side right now. Uvalde chief attempts to communicate with the suspect in English and Spanish. Now, the entire communications was always one way. The suspect never communicated, so it was not communication. We're talking at. But an officer, there's a teacher shot in there, to which the Uvalde PD officer replies, I know. The chief, people are going to ask why we're taking so long. We're trying to preserve the rest of the life. The chief, do we have a team ready to go? Do we have a team ready to go? Have at it. It's at 12:27. 12:28, the chief. There's a window over there. Obviously, the door is probably going to be locked. Probably going to be locked. That is the nature of this place. I'm going to get some more keys to test. 12:28, the chief. These master keys are working here, bro. Aren't working here, bro. We have master keys, and they're not working. The chief at 12:30. Okay, we've cleared out everything except for that room. We still have people down. They're just past the flag to the right. But we're ready to breach, but that door is locked. 12:33. The chief. I say we breach through those windows and shoot his expletive head off through the windows. This is an hour and a half, an hour after he entered the building. An hour after he entered the building. 11:35, a hooligan tool arrives through the west door. At 12:38, the chief attempts to communicate with the suspect in English and Spanish. At 12:41, the chief says, just so you understand, we think there are some injuries in there. And so you know what we did, we cleared off the rest of the building so we wouldn't have any more besides what's already in there, obviously. 11:42, the chief says, we have an expletive problem getting into the room because it's locked. He's got an AR-15 and he's shooting everywhere like crazy, so he stopped. 12:43, the Uvalde chief, they got to get that expletive door open, bro. They can't get that door open. We need more keys or something. 12:46, the chief says, if y'all ready to do it, you do it, but you should distract him out that window. 11:47, a sledgehammer enters from the east hallway. 11:50, the breach and termination gunfire. At the time, there was a stack of 7 officers that went in. Actually, only 4 went directly in because the door closed, as will happen in some of these operations, and left the 3 out. 3 entered thereafter, shortly thereafter. 5 officers fired rounds, fired rounds at the subject, killing the subject at that time. Chairman, that concludes the timeline. And of course, I know that you may have some questions on the door and other questions that I'm ready to discuss right now with some of the pictures that we have. And I thank you for the opportunity to have gone through that.
Okay, so you're ready to get some questions now?
Yes, sir.
I've got a couple, and then we'll open it up. You said the outside door was unlocked.
Yes, sir.
Now, was that lock, as I understand it, there at one time was a rock, the teacher removed the rock, the teacher closed the door or heard slam the door. We don't know really what all to believe because we've heard so much stuff. But was the door closed, and did the lock just not work?
The only way you can lock these exterior doors in the west building, there's 4 doors. One is for the library and 3 other entrances, east, west, and south. The only way to do that is from the outside. You can't do it otherwise. So when she knocked the rock out, it closed securely, but there's no way for her to tell that the door was unlocked. And the only way to know that the door was unlocked is go out, close the door, okay, then try it. So that's the only way you can tell on this particular model.
But he came straight through the door with no problem.
It was unlocked. He walked straight through it.
So did y'all check the lock later to see if the lock was malfunctioning, or was it working?
Yes, the locks were working fine. And that on the exterior doors, the locks were working fine. Now I can tell you, looking at the picture here, you don't need a key to get into this building. It could have been locked. This glass doesn't have mesh on it. All you have to do is shoot through this glass. Okay, reach in, there's a bar. Well, here's a bar. Pull that, and you're in. Now, the subject would have known that. He would have known it. And the same thing, these panes are also vulnerability.
Yeah, anybody can look at that and tell it'd be easy to take a gun and shoot holes in it and reach around.
Yes, sir.
But the first question was, the lock was functioning correctly?
The lock was functioning correctly, and the door was unlocked. It was closed, but unlocked.
I thought when it closed, it was supposed to automatically lock.
Well, you can set it to two sections, and it's similar to the actual door in the interior as well. You can turn it all the way one direction, it's unlocked. You can turn it another direction, and it's in the locked position.
So the latch was working functionally.
Yes, sir.
Well, it was just turned in a position when you close it, it doesn't lock.
Exactly. Someone did not lock that door.
Okay.
And similarly, the south door, which I described officers going in early on, that door was unlocked as well.
Second thing, okay, you may have just said what I was fixing to ask, but the classroom door, was it locked or not locked?
The classroom door, if we can get a picture of it, I think this one is probably the best example if you don't mind. This isn't the actual door. Well, this shouldn't really. This is the actual door, but we don't really want to use that. This is room 127 and 126. That's what 111, this 112 and 111 would look like in that regard. And here's the door. You cannot lock this door from the inside of the classroom. There's nothing the teacher could do to lock the door inside the classroom. The teacher can come outside the classroom as the requirement is to lock the door with a key, only with a key, and this right here by turning it, you know, and to the locked position. And I can actually have the door of another, this came from the West Building, one of the doors right here, and I can demonstrate that if you'd like at this time, Mr. Chairman.
So the teacher could not even lock the classroom door from the inside?
That's correct. There's no way to lock the door from the inside, and there's no way for the subject to lock the door from the inside.
It was open.
We'd heard reports that the lock was malfunctioning, that they had turned in a request for the lock to be fixed. Is that all fictitious? Or
we had a locksmith inspect the lock and the strike plate. The lock was functional. The strike plate was not. What was not happening is, so as you can see on this door here, is that, yes, the lock was working as it was designed, but if it doesn't, if the through doesn't get into the strike plate, it may be locked, but it's not secure. You can just open it. And that's, you know, so you can it can be the locked position, ironically, in the locked position or unlocked position, and it's still unsecured and can be opened.
Okay, so there was never a request to have a lock fixed?
There was evidence that the requests were made about that lock based on an interview with the teacher and also some reports that we found of submissions to have it fixed.
So a teacher thought the lock was broken?
Yes, the teacher was convinced it was unlocked and it was broken and reported it earlier.
And was that request made like days before the shooting, or weeks, or months?
I can't say. I'd have to go back and get the exact timeline. I don't have that right now. Chairman, I'll get that back to you in the committee, exactly what days that were requested that they would be fixed.
On the officer's radio, you know, I heard he went in without his radio, then he obviously was requesting his radio.
Yes, sir.
But I was told later, or maybe by you or someone else, that the radio would not actually function inside the school.
Yes, sir.
Because it did not have the strength to reach out of the school.
Yes, sir. We conducted a threat and vulnerability assessment of the site while we had control of the school. And our DPS special agents brought in our communications team, and we conducted tests of everybody's portable radio, Uvalde PD, Sheriff's Office, Border Patrol, DPS, everybody's portable radio in that West Building. And the only portable radios that worked in that West Building were Border Patrols. Okay, and they were the only ones that worked.
All right, so we've got a police school officer whose radio will not work inside the school.
That's correct. Yes, sir. And nor would the PDs, okay? So if they're responding to assist, nor would the sheriff's office if they're responding to assist, and nor will DPS officers if they're responding to assist. The Border Patrol has a station there in Uvalde, and that's why they had so many agents in the area. And of course, they've got a stronger, you know, boost on their particular tower. I can tell you that even when we take Border Patrol and we were able to link them and patch them all together, then even Border Patrol's radios didn't work.
Okay, I've got Senator Zaffirini raised her hand first. Senator Zaffirini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel McCraw, you talked about different stages of this tragedy, starting with the shooter's social media messages, his communications with people, including the young woman and the young lady in Germany. And you talked about communications. You talked about the communication among the officers, the radio communications and others. Looking back specifically at all of those areas of this tragedy that you have addressed, what is it that we must change going forward? What lessons have we learned that we could implement going forward?
And one thing we did early on, Senator, is recognize that it would be better if the Department of Public Safety was asked to do the investigation. It was far better that we enlisted the expertise of really active shooter situations and And fortunately, Texas has a nationally recognized experts at the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Program at Texas State University. And they have well-known experts. And we asked them early on while we had control of the scene and provided information to please let them do an assessment, okay? The tactics were employed, where the breakdowns occurred, and make recommendations, okay, in terms that other options that could have been used at that point based upon the facts of this particular scenario and options going forward. Moreover, we also requested that the School Safety Center conduct an audit, an assessment of the school safety and compliance with rules and regulations that relates to the requirements that have been laid out by the Texas legislature. And well, as I just mentioned earlier, we conducted our own threat and vulnerability assessment, not unlike what DPS Special Agents did for the University of Texas campus in the aftermath of that brutal attack on a co-ed, and also at Texas Tech University at the request of the chancellor. So that we did that same thing at that location, and of course we came away with recommendations. From that, we made that available to the Commissioner Morath, and we met with him last week. The team met with him last week and went over the assessment. It's a preliminary assessment, the draft, but there's some clear things that do need to change, and I know that he's always looking for ways to improve, and those have been provided to the Commissioner, and I can discuss some of them if you'd like.
That's exactly what I want, some recommendations.
Sure. The perimeter. First, the campus perimeter fence is inadequate to prevent threats from accessing the campus, period. Okay, just I mentioned 4-foot fence. It's tubing, very easy, very lax. There's gaps in it. There's a lack of controlled access points. And as you know, the Capitol, we use what? We use these badges, right, to badge in. And the advantage if a teacher leaves or if a student leaves, you can deny them access to come back into it, and you can control access, and you can see when people enter and exit. So that's an advantage. Plus, it's a locking mechanism that's more secure than what we've seen, especially when the defects would be detected easier and earlier. A lack of card key access, we just mentioned, controlled, obviously, I just mentioned, but lack of controlled access points. The access points and the entrance gates are not controlled, and they do not guide visitors to one location. Now, this didn't make any difference in this situation, but it is a concern was brought out. The exterior doors, as mentioned, do not have strike plates installed to protect the bolt or latch from prying or picking. There are no deadbolts installed on the exterior doors to strengthen them. Rocks and other debris were removed from the area around the door, painted rocks they had throughout the campus along those lines to let people back in. Exterior door inset glass panes, which I showed before. I mean, obviously, this is like a no-brainer. Someone can go through that at some point very easily. And of course, within arm's reach, if you take out the window, then you're able to reach your hand and do it. Now, ironically, in the interior classrooms had web inside this interior pane that you see, and the exterior doors did not. So it was tougher. You can still take them out and put your hand in and open the door. It doesn't mean you can't get it out. You absolutely can. The subject could have, but he didn't need to in this particular case. The classroom doors are vulnerable to all classroom doors being accessible from the hallways once in the building. This is further enhanced due to the fact that the access to the campus is not controlled. The classroom doors are vulnerable to attack, and some of the locations of classrooms outside doors, there's many as 40 doors across, I believe 8 buildings on that campus. But some of those are like mobile units that they open directly out, and there's access to those mobile units from the outside. So if you get inside, the perimeter, then immediately you can access that. You're right looking at a mobile, and essentially a mobile unit, and you can drive around campuses all over the state and see these because of the growth of students, and they expand. So now you got an access door, an access issue, especially if you haven't controlled the access around the campus that would allow anybody to go up to that particular door. They have adjoining classroom door, and I didn't mention it specifically, but there was an adjoining door. Okay, that's how he was able to get easily between 111 and 112. It facilitated him, but could have facilitated action by law enforcement. So between 111 and 112, the door was, we believe, unlocked because it was always kept unlocked, because teachers will watch their students for someone else's students if they're out of the room at that point in time. So and even if not, it's easy to breach that particular doorway, and there's 2 doors adjoining the room. A knock box, we heard a lot about keys. Where are the keys? Where are the keys? Well, a knock box, is a secure safe where a campus or building master key is kept, for first responders. And if we had it, you may have 3 master keys, but they're all in one place. A duress system. There was no duress system throughout the campus, and the lack of it, linked to a mass alert system with redundancy features, which is recommended. A mass alert system can immediately alert the entire campus via multiple notification platforms. So they have a Raptor system and they did. The principal, they sent messages out and hit teachers. It went to everyone along those lines, but it's not the same as a duress system. Emergency evacuation diagrams. We found red bags are left in rooms. And in that red bag, one of the things you'll have is a diagram of the campus. And the advantage of that is you can look at, so you're a first responder, you have that immediately. Oh, this is what it looks like right here, right now. You don't need blueprints. You don't need to. The challenge was some of those diagrams are wrong. I mean, some were correct, but some are wrong. And one of the ones that was wrong was used to look at and say, hey, what about a sniper location? Well, if you look at it, it looks like the library covers the windows. In the back, and would eliminate a sniper position. So and that's an example that why it's important to have the diagrams correctly. Emergency response communication enhancement system, that goes back to the radio communications. There are systems, and we saw it after 9/11, when we had officers and firefighters that were killed in 9/11 because they couldn't get communications, they couldn't talk to them because of the concrete and walls, glass, and things like that prevented communications. And there is a way to expand or enhance communications by taking the signal, okay, and increasing that signal through antennas on campus in that regard. That'd be just some of the things. And again, the experts are going to be school safety center, not the department, as it relates to the school. But that's our things that we saw immediately based upon this campus, and this particular event that we identified and had discussed it with the commissioner.
We all know that there are areas where there is not adequate service.
I'm sorry?
We all know that there are areas where there is inadequate service for telephones, for radios, et cetera, specifically cell phones.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
What can we do to ensure that at all of our schools, we do have enough power to ensure that there is effective communications among people who have cell phones, among people who have radios?
Well, cell phones did work, obviously, inside the school. So the cellular backbone was sufficient in Uvalde that day. That's how the chief communicated with the dispatcher. That's how Chloe called 911. That's why the teacher called. So cell phones worked. It's just the portable radios that first responders had didn't. And the irony of ironies. But and of course, the only thing you can do, either a new radio system, because their system was really not designed or wasn't designed as needed for the requirements in terms of school safety or this situation and others. Either replace it, or going back to what I talked about before, there's a way you can buy, or a technological solution that you can expand the signal inside the school, and that can be done.
But for example, that relates directly to Uvalde. And what I'm trying to do is see what we can learn from Uvalde, from that horrific tragedy, to ensure that we address the problem statewide.
Well, every school should be evaluated for that. There should be, and I know that, and there'll be other people that will testify, including some great professionals, city chiefs and ISD chiefs that will be testifying, and what they're doing and proactively in that regard. But if you're going to do active shooter training, it's always best we do it together, okay? It's always best to do it at a school location where there's no kids. And it's always best to check the whole system, not just in terms of how you respond together as a team, but communicate as well. And of course, there's no reason why we can't test all those radios, okay, to make sure everybody's radio operates inside a school. And for that matter, large public buildings.
And that's my point. For example, if you're in a school that is right on the border, yes, you might look at your cell phone and see a message that says, "Welcome to Mexico." Yes, ma'am. And the service in Mexico takes over. It is more dominant than the service on the American side.
We haven't fixed operability, let alone interoperability, in some places along the border and other parts of Texas where there's not the cellular backbone or infrastructure to support communications.
Would you agree that that is something that we need to look at and make recommendations about?
Absolutely.
Regarding social media, the shooter in Uvalde did have specific social media messages and did communicate directly with persons about what he intended to do. What responsibility do we have to monitor social media and to intercede when something like this is evident or at least threatened?
Well, the evidentiary ones, the ones that were of concern that would certainly generate action, were done through messaging and not like posting. So these are messaging, sometimes four-person chat on Snapchat and Instagram, or sometimes it was gaming platform where multiple people were talking in that regard. Those messages require a subpoena, okay? And so what was concerning is that no one brought it to the attention because people, even some people were getting messages, were concerned and sometimes blocked the subject from communication. So, it would have been better if they had alerted somebody instead of just blocked the particular subject in that point. So that requires the public to be able to proactively report that. That said, in the end, there's so much data, okay? I can't even describe how much data there is, as you know it very well. So the only ones that are able to have the expertise and resources, whether if there's algorithms that are developed to identify threats, words that are key words, and of course that gets into privacy, that is provided to law enforcement as a threat to life or suspicious at that point in time. And that's where you're going to have the debate, privacy over, okay, the saving of lives. And there's very smart people in the social media environment and business that in high tech that can, there's no doubt in my mind, they can develop algorithms to figure out what you'll buy or what you want to buy by a moment. They can certainly identify algorithms and develop things that will pare it down to that entirely suspicious wordings and groups of wordings like school shooter, for example, a clue, okay, that those things are somehow at least brought to the attention where law enforcement has a chance to at least get a subpoena and go before and try to get some of that information.
Many years ago, only certain individuals with specific relationships with a child who was abused were required by law to report that child abuse. This legislature passed a bill requiring anyone who knew about child abuse to report it. Do you believe that we should consider a law like that, requiring anyone who knows about threats like this to report it?
Well, obviously policy is well above my pay grade and something for you and the governor, but I can say that certainly would help. Because, people, if we can't do it and require it, at least to the extent we can educate people that, and what's concerning is that some of these things are group things. It's almost like they're talking to each other, that they support each other. This is cool, neat, a part of this deviant subculture, whatever you want to call it in that regard. But it always gets somebody's attention, and they stop, or they block, or they get out of that messaging. All it takes is one report. It might give us the opportunity. And obviously that didn't happen in this case. And unfortunately, every time you go back and look at one of these tragic situations, you see opportunities that we had to be able to stop that pathway towards that violence.
Thank you. There are investigations underway, and we have heard so much conflicting information about what happened, when it happened, and by whom certain actions were taken or not. What hope is there that the families who were so negatively impacted, so horrifically impacted in Uvalde, will one day get the truth about exactly what happened?
Well, I can tell you this, that there's not a major investigation I've been involved in my entire career with the department and with the FBI that initially we don't know. But yet there's a crushing demand for information. So you provide information with provisos. It's preliminary, hasn't been corroborated, but nevertheless, you're reporting information. And that information ends up being misinformation a day later or 2 days later. Now, the advantage we have is in the position we're in right now, and that's why we're very careful today. We're not going by witness statements, okay? What we're doing is going by physical evidence that we've collected, that we've reviewed frame by frame, that has been enhanced, that we looked at. So everything I've testified today is the facts. So the family can rest assured that information is correct, plain and simple. If we change the number, for example, I think I said there's 420 rounds of ammunition in the truck that was left, or 900 rounds in the backpack, or at the end of the day, the subject, had, over 186 rounds on him. If the number changes to 185 or something like that, I think the public would understand, or it's 899 and it was rounded off. But everything I've testified today is corroborated just by the areas in your book. Will show you exactly where that information came from on that timeline.
Thank you. In 2019, this legislature passed a bill requiring public school districts to include an active shooter emergency response plan in its multi-hazard operations plan and active shooter trainings for school district peace officers. In 2021, we passed another bill requiring school board members to take a course about school safety. So both of these bills were passed and should be in effect. I'm sure you are familiar with those two laws and more. Are the laws that we have passed working, or which do we have to go specifically look at again and improve them? For example, those regarding active shooter training.
Well, I'll say this, that, obviously not enough training was done in this situation. Plain and simple, because of bad decisions, terrible decisions. Terrible decisions were made by the on-scene commander and should have never happened, plain and simple. Now, I can say the state of Texas has already, been leaders in the forefront, its legislature and its leadership, and when it comes to school safety. An active shooter, you've got the nationally recognized Center of Excellence for, before active shooter training is at Texas State University. It's funded by the state and the federal government as well. And works in partnership with the FBI. School Safety Center. They don't have other school safety centers around the nation in that regard. When you implement it, was the idea that so we can look at all the things, so they have plans in place, look at vulnerabilities and those things, and a checklist of things to do at schools in that regard. At the end of the day, the post-Santa Fe thing is what can we do to prevent? On the front end, we talked about the pre-attack. Okay, the only thing, if you make it, that's where your success is. Looks like when you can stop it before it happens, and you address that in the post Santa Fe and provided it. I can't tell you that, and they won't like me saying it, and I might get some of my accounts banned. But at the end of the day, is that. I'm as a law enforcement professional, I'm disappointed in the social media industry for not being more proactive. And I understand that they got a business model. Privacy is important. If the people think there's not privacy, they may lose money. I get this. But I just certainly believe that I have great confidence in their resources and their capabilities and their acumen and technology to be able to identify solutions, that can help identify, potential threats. And bring that to the attention of law enforcement, and use it through, have judicial controls in place. Make sure it's not Big Brother, but that give law enforcement an opportunity, at least, to identify suspicious activity and act upon it.
What recommendation would you make to this committee to include in our report from the perspective of the head of the Department of Public Safety? If we were to ask you to name one recommendation that we would adopt, what would that recommendation be?
Well, we need to train more. And I'll say this from a DPS standpoint, just from the director's standpoint. One thing I want to make sure that we're never in a position when we show up, because more often than not, when we show up, it's a supporting role. Most of our resources were, in Eagle Pass, in Val Verde, in Del Rio, Webb County, for example, in your area. So we got as quick as we could get there. We got there, but we want to make sure that when we show up, it doesn't matter where. In Santa Fe, we had 2 troopers right in there with the chief, one taking a shot at the shooter. We want to make sure they have the equipment that they need. And one thing that's recurring thing that's just disappointing over and over, that we have to have shields. No, you don't. But you know what? Why not have one? So we want to put a go bag in every patrol car in the state. And in a go bag, we want to have a ballistic shield, not a SWAT version, not full body, enough to cover the face in that regard, and breaching tools, and train them on the breaching tools. So, everyone, right now, our breaching experts are going to be on our SWAT teams or special response teams. That's where our breaching expert is, because it's usually used for search warrants and stuff. I want every trooper to know how to breach and have the tool to do it when they show up. So we're not just supporting in terms of having an officer on the scene. We're also bringing equipment that may or may not be needed, but at least we have it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Kokorst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director McCraw, at the beginning of your remarks, you were very defined in the characteristics of the shooter. You went through his age and different things. I have a couple of questions on that. You mentioned animal cruelty. That's been talked about a lot. Did he commit animal cruelty, and was anyone aware of that?
Well, first of all, this is where I get to digress and say, based on interviews and not on physical evidence, the reports that he was involved in cruelty, animal cruelty, particularly cats, walked around with a plastic bag of dead cats. And there was other information, okay, the reports. None of that was brought to the law enforcement attention. It's a crime in itself, but it's another key. You know, I didn't include it on the timeline, didn't include it in terms of the suspicious, because it's not, we're depending on witnesses telling us this after the fact, but clearly it was, we believe, I'll say this, I believe as of right now that he did engage in, okay, animal cruelty, and of course that's a part of the pathway, okay, to become individuals involved in, you know, suicidal, fatalistic, and certainly animal cruelty is something to look for.
You did not mention a toxicology report. Do we have a toxicology report?
No, autopsies have not been, we don't have the report, the final report yet. The medical examiner is doing will do the final report.
And do you believe
on all the individuals involved? And the district attorney is also recognized that it's appropriate to have additional expertise. I think she's enlisted the support of well-regarded medical professional.
At this point, no toxicology report on the shooter.
That's correct. Yes.
And then of his characteristics, was he a gamer? Did he?
Yes, he played Fortnite with friends at school and friends other locations that he found online.
First-person shooting games?
I can't tell you exactly what games he played.
And then truancy. I've seen different reports on how long he had been truant. Are you aware of how long he had been truant?
I know that he hadn't completed a lot of the curriculum, and he was well behind. It's been reported as far back as a sophomore when he left his what would be normally a junior year. But I believe that TA could do a better job in terms of answering that question in terms of truancy. I can tell you that we've yet to find anything in his files, disciplinary files, anything that you would expect to find with somebody with this type of background. We just haven't found it.
And then to your timeline, you talked about the door. Mr. Chairman, you asked some questions. I want to clarify and make sure that I heard this correctly. The classroom door that he entered, did I hear you correctly say that the lock was broken, that it did not?
The lock was not broken. Okay, the strike plate was dysfunctional, and the only way you can get it to lock is from the outside is lock in the lock position, and it's nuanced, and that's why we brought one of the doors in the lock position, and then pull on it and get it to seat, the throw to seat in the lock plate. Well, if you can do that, then it would be locked, okay, or I'll call it secured. It would be secured at that time.
So while there was a lot of time lapse in your timeline, waiting on a key, and there's a lot of the communication that you have transcribed. The fact could we ascertain here or conclude that there was never a need for a key because the lock was not working? The swipe plate was not working properly.
I don't believe, and I don't believe, based on the information that we have right now, that door was ever secured. In fact, I have great reason to believe it wasn't secured. The subject doesn't just walk in, as I've testified before, then shoot the classroom, walk back out of the hallway, then walk back in again seamlessly, okay? And he didn't have a key, and he certainly didn't lock. He couldn't lock it from the inside. So the door was unsecured, and we've gone back and checked in our interviews. And did anybody touch the door and try it? How about, do you need a key? Well, one of the things they teach you in active training, I'm sure that one of the experts can talk about it. How about trying the door and see if it's unlocked? Okay, what we used to call a clue at that point. Why not? And of course, no one had. And so even if you're a part of the breaching team, we've gone back and talked to them, and they've been led to believe that it's locked. Even they, when you go back and talk to them, they didn't try the door. They took the key. As you can do the key, it'll open it. Okay, whether it's locked or unlocked, it will take the throw and put it back into the door, and you move it, and you can walk, and you go right in. So that's.
So out of lessons learned, what we would conclude from your testimony today would be that no one tried the door. There was a lot of time waiting for a key, of which a dysfunctional door was never locked because the shooter was able to walk in and, as you say, go back and forth.
Yeah, but
finally,
but moreover, though, you didn't need a key. Okay, there's tools. And the alert program, and you'll have some experts testify, I think sometime today, they're going to be here. We had them go in and see if they could breach, and you can talk to them what they figured out, what they can do, how long it took. But the point is, you don't have to wait for a key, and shouldn't have to forever wait for a key to breach. And they'll talk, I'm sure, Windows. Windows are great access points. And oh, by the way, you're protected.
And my last point of clarification on your timeline, from 11:28 and 25 seconds, the suspect crashes vehicle. We've heard lots of different reports about how long he was outside. He obviously, I heard, how many shots did he fire outside before he entered at 11:33, which is 6 minutes and 35 seconds according to my math.
He fired 3 rounds at the funeral home. Okay. He fired another 24 rounds while outside of the West Building in 2 different classrooms as he walked towards the door.
And did those bullets enter the classroom?
Yes.
They did not harm any children in those particular...
There was 2 other victims that were injured. It was a teacher who was shot in the stomach, and it was a teacher, and it was a student. They were in classroom 109, but the rounds came, rounds came from room 111 into the wall, through a classroom and into the classroom that they were in, which is 109.
None of the bullets from the outside harmed a child, but they did penetrate into the classroom.
Some children were injured, but we're talking about penetrated bullets. The only ones that I've talked about were the 2, the ones that I've already mentioned.
Thank you, Mr.
Oh, and we need to probably say that the only time we found rounds that officers fired was in room 111, at the time of the breach.
Okay, I've got a number of members that are indicating to me they want to ask a question. Let me just say, I think everybody has their lights on and is requesting. So I'm going to start with my vice chairs. So Senator Creighton's going to be next, and then we'll take it by seniority all the way down. And then I have some of the non-members who would like to ask some questions once we're all finished. All right, so Senator Creighton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I think I can get through my questions fairly quickly. Within 3 minutes of the shooter entering the school, it says on the timeline here provided that 9 officers entered the school within the 5-minute mark. No, within 3 minutes of the shooter entering the school, 9 officers were in the school with rifles. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I mean, there's as many as 11. Shortly thereafter, with 2 of them had rifles.
And so Chief Arredondo, incident commander, as it's stated, said many times through the audio that the officers in the school only had pistols. What is the discrepancy? Which is fact?
2 officers had rifles. And so there was never a need for rifles. I mean, the 3 initial UPD officers that arrived, but thereafter there was, anywhere from 11, and the numbers kept increasing, and the number of rifles kept increasing over time.
So even though there was never a need for rifles, Chief Arredondo kept saying, we only have pistols, we need rifles. Why is that? What in law enforcement training would lead him to continue to say that over and over?
Well, first of all, you don't need...
as if that was a necessary factor to advance.
Well, first of all, as a commissioned officer, you don't need a rifle. You have a gun. There's a reason you have one. You have body armor. So it's going to be risky. Officers, and Chief Aranda was right. I mean, officers are likely to get hurt, and some may die. But it's less likely that they would than children without the armor, without the weapons, without the training, left alone with someone that had already brutally killed. At least at that time, we don't know the timing of it, but ultimately killed, 21 people.
So just to be clear again, within 3 minutes of the shooter entering the building, 9 officers were in the hallway with pistols and rifles. And within, at the 5-minute mark, Chief Arredondo was heard saying, he's contained in this office. Is there an office on the floor plan that you provided as an exhibit?
Not that I'm aware of. It's as referenced in the particular rooms. There's a janitor room, there's a restroom, but there's, I don't know. It's not an administrative building. These were classrooms.
So in a school within days of a summer break, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that kids were in the classroom when making decisions about determining whether or not it's an active shooter protocol or a barricaded intruder protocol?
It's more than reasonable to assume that there were children inside those classrooms, room 111 and 112.
There's many references by Chief Arredondo about the door being locked and needing keys and more keys and a master key and just constant references to keys. But is there any evidence whatsoever that shows through the video as it was examined later that the door was ever, that there was an attempt to open the door or test whether or not it was locked?
We could never see anybody put their hand on the door, and of course up until the breach. And then at the breach, we've gone back and talked to the breachers, re-interviewed the breachers, and they said no, they didn't try the door handle beforehand.
And then there's a reference to a sledgehammer and a hooligan, and those are separate.
Yes, sir.
And then, so was there any reason within your experience with in law enforcement training overall why either the door wouldn't have been checked as to whether or not it was locked, understanding there's gunfire, but with a hooligan and with an available sledgehammer, what would be a reason why the door would not be checked, and why would Chief Arredondo keep referring to the fact that keys were needed through the minutes and what it ultimately ended up being 77 minutes of delay?
Yeah. Well, respectfully, Senator, one of the reasons we wanted to have an outside independent review by subject matter experts is so they can answer those types of questions. Because then it becomes my professional opinion as opposed to what's consistent with doctrine. But I would suggest that doctrine, I'll go back again, is very, very simple. Okay, you don't wait for a SWAT team, right? No time for a SWAT team. If you got one officer, that's enough, right? So you don't have to wait for 11 or 12 or 50 or 30. You got one's enough. If you got to, you're there in the scene, you got an obligation to go and immediately engage the shooter, okay, and stop the shooting and really stop, which is really stop the killing, because there could be other ways to kill it, and then stop the dying. That's preached, practiced, and required in the state of Texas. It just wasn't implemented.
And the assumption in a school where the shooter's determined to be in one of two classrooms, the assumption being that children would be in those classrooms, I find it hard to believe that why in any way would there be a reference to the shooter as a barricaded intruder in an office when it's not even on the floor plan?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know why. I can just tell you, certainly in the fog of battle, things, get confusing along those lines, but that's why it's important to have some things are unambiguous in terms of what the doctrine is. And I know that, just from my experience, hey, windows are an option. We saw in Santa Fe how effective, getting on the scene quickly was for an officer, even though he was seriously wounded, and the chief being right there, and of course, engaging the subject to these pains, because the pains work against you, but they work for you too. It provides you an opportunity, and the experts will be able to talk about how they can quarter a room, and you can look at it and wait for the suspect. So there's things you can do to protect the kids in the room, and that's why they say, in terms of, we'll isolate is a word, and of course, distract. Things that can distract. I mean, obviously, if you're simultaneously hitting the windows, okay, in room 111 and 112, is going to distract the subject when you go in. It's human nature. It's practiced along those lines. None of that was considered. The only thing that, at the end of the day, like I said before, we waited for rifles, we waited for a radio, we waited for a SWAT team, we waited for shields before the SWAT team. There's always some reason why we didn't go in. And of course, the result was 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds. And in an active shooter environment, that's intolerable.
And I just want to make it clear for the record and for those listening that when you say we, and you've been very out front on your efforts to help participate and find the answers in this investigation as to what protocols were followed from the ABC News interview just aired.